Attachment is the ability to form emotional bonds with other people. It is the foundation of emotional development and is a predictor for later functioning. Therefore, it is one of the most important issues in infant development. This lecture will explore the two most popular theories of attachment, which were developed by John Bowlby and Mary Ainsworth. John Bowlby was a British child psychiatrist who published his theory of attachment in 1969. Bowlby initially studied attachment in non-human animals and was very influenced by the work of Charles Darwin. In developing his theory of attachment, Bowlby concluded that attachment is a natural result of an infant's instinct for survival and consequent need to be protected. From Bowlby's perspective, an infant's ability to attach to a protective figure ensures that it will be adequately nurtured and protected from a harsh environment. Bowlby believed that infants are innately wired to carry out behaviors, for example, smiling, clinging, crying, that are meant to elicit the response of a protective caregiver. The exchanges between infant and caregiver, in turn, create a bond of attachment. It's important to note that while the infant initiates the process of attachment, the nature of the caregiver's response is what strengthens the bond. John Bowlby was born in London, England in 1907 into an upper middle class family. He was cared for primarily by a nanny and did not spend much time with his mother or father, as was custom at the time among his class. Bowlby was sent to boarding school in London with his brother in 1918, and in 1921 he entered the Britannia Royal Naval College in Dartmouth. There he trained to be a naval officer. He eventually decided to study medicine at Trinity College in Cambridge, following in his father's footsteps, who was a surgeon. And after 2 years, he changed his focus to psychology. Around 1929, Bowlby entered University College Hospital in London and started training in adult psychiatry at the Maudsley Hospital after completing his medical qualifications. From 1937 to 1940, Bowlby worked as a psychiatrist at the London Child Guidance Clinic, a school for maladjusted children. 6 months after the start of World War II, Bowlby joined the British Army as Lieutenant Colonel in the Royal Army Medical Corps. It was during this time that he was introduced to scholars at the Tavistock Institute in London, which he joined following the war. It was during this time at the Tavistock Institute where he supervised the work of Mary Ainsworth in the 50s and developed his attachment theory. Bowlby hypothesized that attachment advances through 4 stages. The first of these stages is pre-attachment. In this stage, the infant becomes oriented towards people without differentiating between them. The baby has a preference for the human smell, the human sound, and a rough outline of human face. This phase starts shortly after birth and lasts for the first few months of life. The second of Bowlby's stages of attachment is attachment in the making. In this stage, the infant becomes oriented towards specific people in its environment that it sees regularly and with whom the infant becomes familiar and used to. This phase can roughly be observed around 6 months of age to around 1 year. The third stage is clear-cut attachment. In this stage, the infant develops a preference for one or few specific people to whom the child becomes attached. The child will want to be around these attachment figures when experiencing negative emotions such as fear or stress, and this phase spans from around 10 months to 3 years of age. The last and final stage in Bowlby's theory of attachment is known as goal-oriented attachment. In this stage, the child develops the ability to take the perspective of the attachment figure. This means that although the child will want the attachment figure to be around, it will also be prepared to wait until the caregiver is available again. This phase marks a shift in attachment from being a solid behavioral pattern necessitating physical proximity to a mental representation of a protecting and comforting caregiver who is available to the child when the child needs him or her. There are a few important concepts to Bowlby's theory that are important to mention. Children often experience anxiety when separating from their primary caregivers, and we now understand why by looking at attachment from Bowlby's developmental perspective. However, children eventually learn how to cope with this separation, and it often involves what Bowlby refers to as a transitional object. A transitional object is seen as a symbol of the relationship with the caregiver. They can be an object that may be used to comfort toddlers to help them cope with separations from their caregivers or in other stressful situations. For example, it is not uncommon to see little ones becoming attached to a specific teddy bear, a blanket, or a special toy. These are all common examples of transitional objects. Bowlby also posited that infants can become attached to multiple figures, but the attachment to the primary caregiver or caregivers is the foundation to the child's internal working model for subsequent relationships in life. Although the child's internal working model is not definitive and can develop and change over time in response to changing life circumstances, the attachment representation that arises during the first few years of life does appear to leave its traces into adulthood. The attachment representation developed in early childhood has been found to be predictive of attachment later in life, as well as found to be changeable over time. Various research exploring attachment over the life course has found that secure attachment relationships with a primary caregiver predicted a secure attachment representation in later adolescence. Research has also shown that a radical change of situation, for instance, a divorce of the parents or a serious illness experienced, could predict changes in attachment representation. Even though virtually all children become attached, the quality of the attachment relationships differ. The quality of attachment can be observed in stressful situations where the caregiver is not immediately available to comfort the child. One of the most widely used methods to investigate infant attachment was developed by Mary Ainsworth and her colleagues in 1978, which they entitled the Strange Situation Procedure, or SSP. It has been used for decades and is the best known instrument for measuring infant attachment. Before we get into the Strange Situation Procedure, or SSP, let's cover a bit of background on Mary Ainsworth herself. Mary Ainsworth was born in Glendale, Ohio in 1913. In 1918, Ainsworth moved with her family to Toronto, Canada, where she spent the rest of her childhood. It is said that Ainsworth, a very naturally bright child, decided she would become a psychologist at the age of 15. By the age of 16, Ainsworth began classes at the University of Toronto, where she was one of 5 students to be admitted into the honors course in psychology. She earned her bachelor's, master's, and finally her doctorate in psychology at the University of Toronto by 1939. Ainsworth eventually made her way to London, where she met Bowlby at the Tavistock Clinic. And then she made her way to Uganda, where she conducted mother-infant observations, which aided in the development of her attachment theory. The SSP was developed over the course of many decades and was influenced by the thought of John Bowlby and the Tavistock Clinic, and of course, Ainsworth's own independent studies of normative development and mother-infant interactions in Uganda, which she conducted in the 50s and the 60s. Aimed at observing the nature of the attachment relationship between the infant and its caregiver, the Strange Situation Procedure consists of 8 episodes of about 3 minutes each, during which the child is being observed. The method of the SSP is as follows. First, the caregiver and the infant enter the observation room. It is a small room with some toys and chairs, etc. Nothing special. Second, the caregiver and the infant remain in the room alone for about 3 minutes. Third, a stranger then enters the observation room. Fourth, the caregiver leaves the room. The stranger and the infant are together in the room. Next, the caregiver returns. This is known as the first reunion, and the stranger leaves. At the end of this episode, the caregiver leaves for the second time. In the sixth step, the infant is alone in the room. Next, the stranger comes back into the room. Finally, the caregiver returns. This is known as the second reunion, and the stranger leaves. During the SSP, the amount of child attachment to the mother is measured by how the child responds to the mother following the distressing separation. Special attention is paid to the episodes in which the caregiver is being reunited with the child after the short separations. The behaviors exhibited during the reunion episodes are revealing of how much the infant trusts the caregiver and how long it takes before the balance between exploration of the environment and focus on the caregiver has been restored. Based on their findings, utilizing the SSP, Ainsworth and her colleagues identified 3 types of attachment. One type identified is known as secure attachment. A description of how this may present is as follows. The child uses the mother as a home base and feels comfortable leaving this space to explore the playroom. The child returns to the mother every so often to ensure that she is still present. When the mother leaves the room, the act of separation, the securely attached child will cry and will seek comfort from the mother when she returns. But this child is easily reassured and soothed by the mother's return. Another type of attachment identified is known as anxious attachment. This may present as follows. The child is reluctant to explore the playroom and clings to the mother. When the mother leaves the room, the child cries for a long time. When the mother returns, this child seeks solace from the mother but continues to cry and may swat or pull away from the mother. These infants were somewhat insecure and doubted that their mothers would ever be able to provide the security and safety they need. The third type of attachment identified by Ainsworth and her colleagues is avoidant attachment. This may present as follows. Some infants seem indifferent to the presence of their mother. Whether the mother is present or absent from the room, these children's responses are the same. More recent scholars have added a fourth response known as the insecure, disorganized, or disoriented response. When separated from their caregivers, these children display contradictory behavior. They attempt physical closeness, but retreat with acts of avoidance. These infants often have caregivers who may be struggling with depression, have a history of being abused themselves, or continue to struggle with a traumatic experience in their own lives. Caregivers with infants that fall into this attachment style may act negatively or frightened by their babies with intense outbursts of hostility, or they may be passive, helpless, rarely comfort their babies, and may actually appear afraid of their babies. Thus, the infants become confused in this strange situation. They fear the unknown figure and seek solace from the mother, but retreat because they are also fearful of the caregiver. While most studies of attachment have used the Ainsworth group's SSP method, the manner in which infant attachment is measured raises some concerns. Namely, the measure may not yield valid results with some groups or under certain conditions. For example, the appropriateness of using the strange situation method with certain ethnic groups has been questioned. Thus, in any context, it is important to note how culture may affect how secure attachment may present. In conclusion, attachment represents the foundation of emotional development and is a predictor for later functioning. It is one of the most important issues in infant development, and the two most popular theories of attachment were developed by John Bowlby in 1969 and Mary Ainsworth in 1978. While there exist limitations to these theories, the work of these scholars has been robust and remains influential to the field of human development.